Thank you. Joining me now is former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Saland. Good to see you, Jeremy. Good morning. So let's start with, this when Trump shows up to the Fulton County Jail when he is expected to surrender himself at the end of next week. What do you anticipate is being negotiated right now between Trump's attorneys and Willis's prosecutors, and how do we expect things to play out, even though local officials say we're going to treat Trump like any other defendant, but that doesn't seem very likely considering, he is a former president, and of course there's a lot of security precautions surrounding him.
Well, one of the biggest things they're going to have to deal with is statutorily, in Georgia, if there is a significant risk that the accused will be or can intimidate a witness, then they won't be setting bail. In other words, the person will be staying in. So they're no doubt addressing that issue. That's going to be something resolved by a judge, but they're also resolving whether or not bail should be set. And I cannot imagine that bail will not be set, allowing him to be released and go on his way. As you noted in the segment, he's the most recognizable person, probably at least in the United States, if not elsewhere. So I expect they're discussing dollars, or if that's going to be an issue. Timing is going to be an issue. Secret Service is going to be an issue, because that Rice City Jail, or that Rice Street Jail, has a unfortunately notorious history for even being interviewed or investigated by the Department of Justice for some issues at the facility.
So, as you know, you have the former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, who's also charged in this, who was trying to get this state case moved to the federal system. Many expect Trump and his lawyers will attempt to do the same. Do you expect that? And if so, how strong or not are his chances in getting this case moved to the federal system?
So what he wants to do is something called removal, and that's what Mark Meadows has already started. And they're going to argue, as Mark Meadows has, is this is my job. I was president of the United States of America. I was following my rules and the obligations I had as the president of the United States of America. The problem will be, among other things, is that's not completely accurate. So in other words, yes, you might have been the president and you might have been doing certain things as your job and as your role as the president of the United States. But what was allegedly occurring here was a fraud that goes well beyond the means and responsibilities. The responsibilities of the president, I remind everyone, if they don't know, is not to count votes, is not to challenge the votes in the state of Georgia. That is not his role. There are people who can do that, but that is certainly not him. So he's going to have some difficulties taking that case and bringing it to the federal courts.
Now, Trump is being accused of being the head of a criminal enterprise to overturn the 2020 election results here in Georgia. We've heard a lot about RICO, which is the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, which is at the heart of this indictment. Why specifically RICO? Why did Fani Willis pursue these specific charges? Does it have to do with the penalty and potentially flipping witnesses?
All those things you just mentioned are very valuable, but what's also important to know, when people hear this statute, they think organized crime, they think the mafia or the mob. That is certainly not the case. It's used routinely by states in much, we'll call it smaller or less frightening types of situations. So this is not atypical when there's believed to be a structure and an organization, as lightly as that term can be used, or a crew or a group of people who have a criminal objective and a criminal goal, and they all share in that goal and that criminal objective here to overturn the election in Georgia. But specifically in the state of Georgia, it's a 5-year minimum. That is a significant and heavy sentence. So when you have people at the top, meaning President Trump and his 13 charges, and people at the bottom who are far lesser, they are exposed to that same 5 years. And if I am one of those people, if I'm one of those individuals charged, there is a strong likelihood that I might consider saying, hey, why should I go to prison for 5 years when I'm a really small piece here? Let me tell you what happened. Let me cooperate with you. It's a great tool for law enforcement and for the district attorney's office.
Very interesting. Wonder if there'll be more twists and turns ahead then. Jeremy Saland, I appreciate you this morning. Thanks.